All right. Well, welcome to our November CAIS symposium. Let me, oh gosh, let me man my screen effectively. And I'm trying to switch screens. Of course, I'm fumbling through this. This is the great thing about running an AI center, is that when you can't do technology quickly and efficiently, you seem like an idiot. All right, I'm Eric Rice. I'm the co-director for the USC Center for AI and Society, and this is welcome to our monthly webinar series. And this morning, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague, Dr. Erika Van Buren, who serves as the Chief Innovation Officer for First Place for Youth, where she leads evaluation, learning, and national expansion strategies for scaling First Place's influence and impact in service to older foster youth across the country. She crafts and implements the internal and external evaluation agenda for the agency, works closely with the program leadership to innovate and roll out best and evidence-supported strategies to improve practice, and conducts ongoing sector building and system capacity development activities in support of First Place's mission. With over 20 years of experience, she has cultivated expertise in the areas of community mental health, child welfare program development and evaluation, quality improvement, and performance management practices, and was most recently named as a member of the 11th class of the Anne E. Casey Foundation Leadership Fellows. And I will just add as a personal note that Erika is someone who I've known for many years in the context of advocacy work around homeless and former and foster youth. And this is an exciting presentation to bring to you all, because rather than this being an academic exercise in what ifs around AI, which is sometimes what we bring you, this is actually, she's going to be discussing this morning some real world evaluation in her agency that they are doing using machine learning and AI. So with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Van Buren.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's such a pleasure to be back and to be able to kind of share what we've been up to. I know last year I had 5 minutes at the convening, so I get a whole hour today. So I'm super excited about that. So the title of this lecture is called Raising the Bar, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why that is in a little bit, but we have really dived into kind of expanding our toolkit of ways to learn, ways to improve, and ways to increase our impact at First Place for Youth. And that's why we call this Raising the Bar, because we are really pushing ourselves to be constructively dissatisfied with the status quo. And I will provide the caveat that I am a clinical psychologist by training. And I identify as an evaluation practitioner. So what I do for First Place is really in the vein of evaluation capacity building, improvement science, and implementation science and program design. So I'm going to be coming with that perspective as I'm talking to you about how we've leveraged data science to create an equitable and individualized pathway for young people through our program who have had experience in the foster care system. And the tool that I'm going to be talking to you about is the Youth Success Roadmap tool. So next slide. So this is the journey we're going to be taking together, everybody. First, I want to talk about why we decided to do this. Why did a nonprofit decide to do this? Why precision modeling? And how that relates to our learning agenda and our strategy. Second thing I'm going to talk to you all about today, and very briefly, is the methods, because again, I'm not a data scientist. I partner with data scientists, but I want to talk to you about the methods that were used and hopefully distinguish how those are a little bit different from some of the traditional machine learning techniques and models used in data science. And then I also want to talk to you about what we learned from the modeling process that we did. I'm going to show you the Youth Roadmap tool, and I'll take you through a little journey of what that looks like and how it's used. And then, you know, as somebody who's in the field of change management and being a change agent at my organization, I really do want to spend a little bit of time talking about how we've been managing the installation and adoption of the tool, change, and then also our through line to impact, by talking to you a little bit about the challenges and lessons learned and how we've built infrastructure to support the use of the tool and increased impact for young people. And hopefully we'll have a lot of questions at the end. And if there's anything that's burning that comes up, I know Eric will share it with me as we're flowing through today's conversation. So let's go to the next slide. want to talk to you a little bit about First Place and who we are, provide you with a little bit of a container and context. So First Place for Youth was founded in 1998 in Oakland, California. And our mission is to support foster youth to build the comprehensive skills needed to make a successful transition to self-sufficiency and responsible adulthood. We are one of the largest providers of extended foster care services to older youth. We are the largest provider in California of services exclusively to foster youth. And we focus both on service and advocacy. Our service arm is really centered around our core program model called the My First Place model, which provides a stable foundation of housing. And we also provide rigorous employment, education, and care management services to our young people. We've also been at the table and had a major hand in moving some of the major legislative enhancements to services for young people so that they have a broader spectrum of services. We were instrumental in getting extended foster care passed in California and adopted. And our model really serves as the basis for the regulatory structure of extended foster care in California. We are a national organization, so we are now expanding our influence by scaling our policy strategy and demonstration sites across the country. One of the things that I love about First Place is that for almost 15 years, we've also been on this journey to use data and learning to continuously deepen our understanding of our youth, their needs and dreams, and to get better at what we do in service to meaningful impact, which has really been core to our mission. It's kind of built into our DNA. Throughout this journey, we've been particularly interested in answering some key learning questions that we believe are at the heart of serving young people better. First, who are we serving? It's a very basic question, but I think what I've learned in the nonprofit sector, it's one that people take for granted, because we know over the years our population, even though the eligibility criteria for our services has not changed, the needs of the population that we're serving have. So who are we serving, and who are the young people who are more or less likely to engage in our services so that we can actually adapt our services to more comprehensively and fully engage young people? Second, how do we adapt what we do to support young people with different characteristics and needs at the front door of our program to position each and every youth for success using a lens towards equitable results? And then finally, how do we integrate and balance the delivery of interventions and supports that address young people's psychosocial well-being and those that help them build the skills they need to become economically self-sufficient? There isn't a large research base on how to integrate well-being focused services for young people and also those economic self-sufficiency services in a way that optimizes their success. So the Youth Success Roadmap tool was actually designed to address all of these questions in service to improve results with our young people. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to give you a really quick and dirty on the research on extended foster care in youth outcomes. We know that young people aging out of foster care experience a myriad of disparities and adverse outcomes relative to their same age peers. The stories of foster youth being released from care on their 18th birthday with no place to go and their belongings in trash bags has been an all too common story for the population of young people that we serve. And the good news is that in recent years, there was a major, actually it was the largest policy study ever conducted on the impact of extended foster care. And it happened to be conducted in the state of California by Mark Courtney and his colleagues at the University of Chicago. And it's documented that with each additional year that young people spend in care from ages 17 to 21, there are significant decreases in the likelihood of experiencing a range of negative outcomes and an increase in the likelihood of activities that promote self-sufficiency, including employment, retention, and post-secondary enrollment. And although these results tell us that extended foster is at least partially achieving its goal, this same research also highlighted that participation in extended foster care is not moving the needle as successfully in helping young people to obtain college and vocational degrees or in obtaining meaningful increases in earned income. And so we have a long way to go in helping young people to get to a place when they leave extended foster care that they are truly self-sufficient and that they are on a pathway towards thriving and not needing the system anymore. Next slide. So in service to these learnings and a focus on impact, First Place leveraged several years of our own in-program administrative and follow-up data, and we collect a ton of data on youth we served. And we partnered with Peter York and his team at BCT Partners. Peter York is a data scientist who I adore, and he's doing some really, really pioneering work in the field of data science to conduct a precision analytics modeling process and to build the youth success roadmap tool. We call it lovingly the YRT. The YRT is a practitioner-centric web-based decision support tool that is used by our direct service providers and managers to support high precision programming in the development of action plans, the selection of interventions, and decisions about transition needs and timelines with individual youth, with the ultimate goal of helping all young people who come through our door leave our program with life-sustaining living wage employment. And we chose this particular outcome as a call to action based on what we were learning from our internal evaluation. And of course, the research findings that Mark Courtney's study had elevated, that earnings weren't impacted by time in extended foster care, that getting a job or enrolling in school, while an important step, wasn't quite good enough for us in supporting our young people to truly actualize economic self-sufficiency. Hence the reason why this presentation is called Raising the Bar. The process of modeling our data and developing the YRT helped us better understand what works in the real world when serving transition age foster youth within our core My First Place program in achieving living wage and ideally career-related jobs. I'd like to talk about the results of the original modeling process that formed the backbone of this tool, which included a sample of 393 youth who had enrolled and exited from our program between 2015 and roughly 2018. The majority of young people who had enrolled and exited from our program during this time identified as African-American, female, and had an average age of 18.5 when they entered our program. So that gives you a little bit of the socio-demographics of the sample that we're talking about. And many of the learnings generated from this modeling process have broader implications for the field at large, which is what we have actually leveraged for our policy work. And that's one of the things that we won't get into today, but if you have questions about, we have done a webinar all about that as well in the past, so I'm happy to send that out. All right, let me talk a little bit about the modeling process on this next slide. And this is all you're going to get from me on the modeling process today, but there's a great case study if you're interested on this process more. It goes into much deeper detail that was written by Peter York and showcases First Place. So the process of building the models that provide the foundation for the YRT involved a series of both predictive and prescriptive modeling steps that found matched comparison groups, identified what worked for these different groups, and evaluated the statistical effects of what was working for each group in obtaining living wage employment. Pete and his team took all of our data, including implementation, goal attainment, and progress measure and outcome data, and developed what he calls an ideal program model for what works in achieving living wage employment. He then identified those matched comparison groups based on contextual information, youth characteristics, and experience data from our intake and baseline assessments that predicted how likely different subsets of youth were to get this ideal program model. They were then grouped based on these shared characteristics and likelihoods of getting what worked. He ran additional models to determine what worked, but what accounted for those differences in the way of what services they received and which in-program milestones they accomplished that increased the likelihood of leaving the program with living wage employment. And then he evaluated the accuracy of those models. And I know that's a lot. So definitely check out the case study if you want to dive in deeper to that. And in essence, the process looked for those naturally occurring experiments that were occurring within groups of similar youth to see who got what worked and what did that do to their likelihood of achieving living wage employment by the time they left. And Pete likes to call this the machine learning version of propensity score matching. Okay, let's move to that next slide. Let's get into the results. So what did we learn about the groupings of our young people? Because we know this from the literature, so what we found were the primary predictors of how young people clustered together wasn't Wasn't surprising for us, because this is what has been shown time and time and again in the literature, is that the biggest variables collected from our assessment that predicted, without any intervention from us, who was likely to leave our program with living wage employment were the age at entry to foster care, the number of foster placements a young person had had, and whether or not they had lived in group homes, and if so, how many. And this gave, once these groups were created, Peter ran the models to determine which youth within each group actually beat their odds in achieving living wage employment, and identified what combination of interventions, dosages, and goal achievements predicted the highest likelihood of success within that group. Looking at young people who positively deviated from youth who were similar to them on these characteristics within these matched variables helped us to pinpoint the most meaningful factors associated with who we were serving and identify those individualized service recommendations for those youth. All right, let's go to the next slide. Another cool thing that came out of the modeling process was that we identified two important patterns of service delivery across all youth that reflected two needed stages for their time in our program. So the first stage reflects a prerequisite for youth that gets them ready to engage in what works for achieving living wage employment, including meeting basic needs and creating stability through engagement, promoting the development of personal assets, and healthy living skills. Once specific services and goals have been achieved in what we call stage one, we call this entry and stabilization stage. The young person is then poised to engage in the services that for that young person are most likely to position them to achieve the ultimate goal of living wage employment by exit. And within the YRT tool, we refer to that stage as pathway to living wage. This part of the process helped us to understand what progress can and should look like for young people over the life cycle of our program, and helped us to start demystifying the complex and yet critical important relationship between healthy living supports and economic self-sufficiency outcomes in a way that was actually actionable for our staff. All right, let's move to the next stage. All right, so across all 393 youth who were part of that original sample, there were a set of services and goals that had the highest impact on average. There were over 20 service goals identified altogether that had a high impact, but 5 of them specifically accounted for 34% of the total variability in the living wage employment target. And there were 8 goals that accounted for 70% of variability in the living wage employment outcome. It's important to note that for all of the high impact services, more of everything wasn't actually always better. So for instance, the modeling revealed that there was an optimal amount of time for each individual young person to spend in program. Without enough time, youth can't gain effective traction in reaching their goals. And yet there can be a point of diminishing returns for young people who have already spent the right amount of time in program, at which point it may be right to support a youth-led transition into a more independent living setting. And the continuum of education and employment needs has implications for the construction of the runway of services for each youth. One youth may need more than 2 years of support based on their level of educational attainment, prior work experience, and psychosocial needs, while another may need only 1 year to achieve readiness for transition. The modeling process provided recommendations that reflect an individualized range of program time necessary to optimize a youth's ability to achieve living wage employment. And on average, the ideal length of stay within our sample of young people was 67 weeks, while the upper range was about 5.5 years. So there's a wide range there. All right, next slide. Okay, this is a living example of the largest participant group reflected in our original sample. So meaning this is the largest group of young people that first place for youth serves. So these are youth who entered foster care between the ages of 7 to 15 years of age, experienced between 2 and 11 foster care placements, and never spent any time in congregate care. The modeling process generated the most impactful services and goals for this group within each stage. And it is important to note that individual recommendations vary for each individual based on baseline and emerging characteristics and needs for that youth. So youth, even within this group, may have different service and goal recommendations. But you can see on the slide that when these youth actually got what works, and they got those high impact services and they were achieving those high impact goals, their chances of achieving living wage increased from 20% to 80%. That's a huge change in odds. So with that, you know what, Eric, I might pause and see if there's any questions that are coming through the Q&A. If not,
I have not seen any questions. I posted up that people could do that. And so I just want to encourage folks that if you have questions, especially clarification questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, because we can see that and field those questions. But for now, thanks for taking a pause to let people ask questions, though.
Sure. Yeah, of course. No problem. And we'll have time at the end for this as well. Haley, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing so that I can share very briefly. It says that host disabled participant screen sharing. Is there?
I'll give you permission.
Great. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is actually show you the tool, give you a bit of a demo of what the tool looks like. And I want to say I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish. You know, this work has been led primarily by our VP of Evaluation and Learning. At this point, I started with the first generation of this tool, and now we're on a second generation of the tool. And Matt Levy, who is our VP of E&L, he has really driven this process using a participatory and human-centered design approach. All right, so let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see that, Eric, Haley, and others?
Yes.
Yes, we
Don't
can.
judge me for the amount of tabs I have open. It's a chronic issue for me. Okay, so there are several different dashboards that we use as part of the Youth Roadmap tool. The one that you're looking at now is the youth-centered one. So this shows an individual dashboard for each young person who is active within the My First Place program. And again, this was actually designed by our practitioners with support from Matt, our VP of Evaluation and Learning. What that looked like is that we did a number of different plan, do, study, act cycles. So we were testing the dashboard and the utilization of the dashboard with our practitioners on an ongoing basis over and over. It was very iterative. And practitioners said, well, we want additional information added to this so that we can have central pieces of information and learning about each individual youth that will help us in utilizing the tool more effectively. So what we have here is a list for Adeline F. This is our fake youth. This is a demo site. The Adeline is in the pathway to living wage. So she's already gotten through entry and stabilization, and she is moving through, she's actually in the pathway to living wage. So she's in a position to be able to really do the things that are going to position her for that living wage employment. She's ready for that. So what we have here is a look at where she is employed currently, what are hourly wages, how often she's working. She's currently underwage, so that's something that her practitioner will be working to help her increase over time. We also provide the education status because we have actually developed more rigor and power around our education to employment services at First Place. So having these two types of information up on the screen available to the practitioners is really important to be able to understand what their status is and where they might want to move the needle. We also have a look at how many weeks they have left in program and how many weeks have already traversed for this young person. When you look down here at the services, we can look at what's already been achieved, and we can look at what the ongoing needs are. And the list here actually provides you with what the most high impact services would be for Adeline if they were effectively utilized. So for her, prioritizing safety and crisis planning, mental well-being, and substance use goals within her action plan is a high priority service goal. Spending more time with her youth advocate, which is her care manager, is a high priority service goal. She's making great progress. She's at 90% of achieving her goals. She's done a lot in this area already. One of the great things about this tool is that when you click on each of these different high impact service goals, it pulls up a practice guideline, which gives you different links to different strategies that you might use with this young person, different tools. So it's essentially creating a customized toolkit for the practitioner to use with the young person so that they are using the best available knowledge base that we have to offer. And they are adhering to model fidelity, which is also incorporated into the practice guideline. The same thing exists for service goals. So we might look at career identification, which I think is what I just showed you, and the ongoing needs there. So as Adeline makes more progress in achieving these goals, she's getting closer and closer to obtaining living wage employment and readiness for exit. The more you do in line with the service goals, the more likely you are to achieve the actual milestones that are outlined right here. So that is what we have for the youth, for practitioners to use with their individual youth. We also have a caseload look on the youth roadmap tool for an individual practitioner. So my first place has youth advocates or care managers. We have employment and education specialists who provide expertise in the area of career identification and exploration, helping young people to get ready for post-secondary education, helping them get through high school, helping them to, get their first job and move up in an apprenticeship or some other earn while you learn program. And so they both have access to these different dashboards, and you can now see the totality of a person's caseload and where they are in achieving the service goals and the milestones and how many weeks they have left. What this also does is it gives a distribution across each of the stages, how many of a young person's caseload are in entry and stabilization and how many are in the pathway to living wage. It's almost like this gives you a sense of a case mix, their case mix of need. It also gives you the number of youth needing high priority goal support so that you can optimize. If building adult supporters and social relationships is a goal for 20 of your youth, maybe that's something you should be talking about in supervision about how you can optimize what you're doing and create more efficiency in where you're directing your attention with your caseload. So it gives you that look as well. All right. And finally, we have this lovely region level snapshot that gives us a sense of where we're moving in achieving service progress and goal progress across different sites and as an organization as a whole. It takes a look at where the distribution of young people are based in terms of their stages, entry and stabilization or pathway to living wage, based on their time and program so that we can look and see who the outliers are, who might be ready, who we really need to be focusing our attention on helping to support better. And it also gives a month to month on total improvements in service progress, right? So we launched this dashboard in April and started looking at this data then, and you can see our average goal progress across all young people has improved from April to November from 48% to 59% just from using the tool. And the service progress has increased from 61% to 76%. You can even look at the young people if you'd like to see where they are and see what their progress has looked like on a month-to-month basis. So this gives you more of a balcony view. And it also helps our managers to plan where they want to strategize with their teams about how to improve in improving these numbers and increasing these numbers and ultimately the impact. Okay, let's stop sharing my screen. And then Haley, why don't we go ahead and have you share? We'll skip by the snapshots since I showed everybody. Does anyone have any questions about what I've just shown? Any questions coming through? Okay, no questions yet, I see. All right, well, I'm gonna finish this out by talking to you about how we've been structuring adoption, installation, and utilization of the tool. There's been a lot of work around this, getting folks to log into their accounts, to be able to figure out where is it in the decision life cycle of a young person in program that you need to be deploying and accessing and leveraging the use of the tool. And we've leaned heavily on program staff for this and the learnings that have been coming out. And that learning has actually helped us to create 6 different pillars for effective use of the tool. The first is the My First Place foundational programming. So we have fidelity to a model. We have codified our program model. We have fidelity to it. And the 3 big things there that help with utilization are making sure that folks are actually doing the assessments and action plans. That's really important because a lot of what's in the tool is centered around that. Maintaining fidelity to dosage and doing other things that are associated with how we're defining the program model, and engaging youth effectively. Youth engagement is really, it's more an art than it is a science. And I think we have doubled down on all of the different ways that we need to embrace a do what it takes to get young people to feel like they can trust their workers, that they feel like they are really driving the process, and that we are bringing in a lot of their supporters to help them be successful in program. So those are the kind of foundational pieces of the My First Place model that are supporting this work. When it comes to iLearning, our YRT functionality, we have to really be focusing on making sure that we've gotten all the bugs out, which we've done at this point, but that folks understand the participant type of their young person, that information is readily available, that we're getting accurate inputs of data. Obviously, garbage in, garbage out. If we're not getting good data and inputs into the system, then that's a problem. And this is a really great way. The use of this tool is another great quality check for our administrative data, because what the tool does is that it automatically pulls out our data from our performance management system into a data warehouse, and the warehouse then punts it to Power BI, where the tool lives, which is our business intelligence software. The recency of the data is really important. So that dashboard that I showed you, that updates every day. So everybody who uses the tool has as close to real-time data as we can get it. In supporting First Place for Youth culture to implement and adopt and embrace the YRT, we have done a lot in the area of communications. So we're constantly reinforcing the why, how this relates to our mission, how it relates to our strategy, how it relates to our priorities in program evaluation and learning, policy development. This has become an organizational priority. Staff get coached regularly in supervision and communities of practice on the how. How do I use it to drive youth success? So we have what we call and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we have what we call our YRT monthly bulletin that comes out that showcases our super users and also gives tips for how other people are using it across the organization, right? And we also have built in guidelines and supports for managers on helping staff to understand how to develop effective interventions using those practice guidelines that support how they do their job. So really reinforcing them using those guidelines. Youth motivation and focus on learning is a big piece of it. So we have other things that we are actually using to complement use of the tool and also to integrate with use of the tool. So we use motivational interviewing. I'm sure most of you on this call are familiar with motivational interviewing. We have actually leveraged specific motivational interviewing strategies for how you can engage young people in setting goals and using the tool to have conversations about goals and what the barriers are to achieving goals to enhance their internal motivation. And then also the social emotional learning aspect of the work. We do a lot of SEL work in concert with utilization of the youth roadmap tool. Staff knowledge and technical use. So again, we're building in some modules for training, but there are a lot of different ways that staff can use the tool. Our managers actually love using it to onboard new staff because it's a great way to teach about the My First Place model and also to begin socializing and indoctrinating them in the use of the tool. And we are also encouraging staff to use it to bring it up with young people, that youth-facing dashboard, to use that in their meetings with young people. And finally, staffing, the final pillar, which is obviously the most important pillar. The people are the most important part of utilization of this tool. And whether or not it's a success or not, we really have to invest in our management, particularly our mid-level managers. And that's what we've done to lead and train and own the Youth Roadmap tool. Having a complete youth team is really important. With the great resignation happening, we've had absences and vacancies in certain positions. That does make it a challenge to be able to sustain the gains that we've made in teaching people how to use the Youth Roadmap tool and setting young people up for success. And then obviously we're doing a housing restructure. And so, we are looking to incorporate housing staff into the use of this tool, which they don't currently use because, it's been a long road to help rethink how our housing staff, who are responsible for moving young people into apartments and that sort of stuff, become a part of the ongoing conversation about youth success, as opposed to really serving as an ancillary landlord for the organization. So that's what we have been focusing on. Next slide. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this before, but some of the things that have been critical for adoption and utilization is our super users. Those staff who are early adopters of the tool, we're really putting them out front. Our care managers, our managers, through the monthly bulletin, in our staff meetings, et cetera. Aligning the Youth Roadmap tool as the priority for the organization. So, the Youth Roadmap tool is part of First Place's strategic roadmap. And I think that has been essential because it's something that also gets discussed at board meetings. It's something that's discussed in our executive team meetings, how it's informing our learning through using some of what we call evaluation exhaust that's coming off of the back end of the system to be able to help us continuously learn about, are we improving? For whom are we improving? Are there groups of young people who are not getting what works? Why? Et cetera. And to evaluate certain new program components, like we just launched an apprenticeship model, whose sole focus is to help get young people into life-sustaining living wage earning jobs. So using this tool as a way to start, doing rapid cycle evaluation for specific sites, and piloting how the apprenticeship is working is our next phase. And that helps to integrate the use of the tool into other functions and other priorities of the organization. And so, and we've been doing communities of practice with our expansion partners, our network affiliates who are all over the country. And we are also going to be doing that, we've started doing that at First Place in California as well. So helping to create spaces for peer-to-peer learning and solution-focused kind of generative conversations about practice and use of the YRT has also been a big focus of ours. So finally, on my last slide, another thing that we have also gotten clear on is building out aspirational targets as part of a measurement line of sight, right? And I'm big on lines of sight. I'm big on measurement lines of sight. And it's basically a series of if-then statements that have targets associated with them. So the first thing that we have to be doing is getting 90% of our staff to effectively utilize the tool. If we're able to do that, then we want to look at increases in service progress, right? 60%, and our target that we set for this, that we're monitoring across the organization, is 60% of youth have made positive quarter-to-quarter progress in getting what works. We then want to see 25% at a minimum of youth successfully transitioning from stage 1, entry and stabilization, to pathway to living wage, right? So from phase 1 to phase 2 in a given quarter. And then we want to see 50% of our youth have made positive quarter-to-quarter progress in achieving goals. And ultimately, we want to see an increase in the percentage of youth who get what works and have near living wage jobs. This is the set of hypotheses we are testing, and we will probably be refining these aspirational targets as we go. So that is my presentation. We've got about 20 minutes for question and answer. And I want to thank you for listening in.
Well, thank you, Dr. Van Buren. I'm sure if this were live, you'd have a nice round of applause going on right now, but I'll be the sole person that you can hear.
Eric.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can't help myself. So this was a fantastic talk. I would encourage folks to please put your questions in the Q&A section and or put them into the chat, although I don't know that many people can actually see the chat, but I can see both. And then there's a student raising a hand. Okay, so Haley, help me out with that one. How do I make that happen? You want to, maybe since you're no longer flipping slides, maybe you can help me with that one.
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and allow that person to talk to ask the question.
Great.
You should be able to use your microphone now to speak if you had a question.
Well, perhaps while the student figures out what's going on, let me ask a question, because to me, and I think that I probably speak for Phoebe and Bistra here as well. We've been really interested in working on projects that can get deployed actually in the world and used, and it's really exciting to see this as an example of a tool that is actively in use. I think we see so few of those, and I guess I have a couple of questions with respect to that. I mean, one is, how long did this take as a process? Because I think that sometimes, it would just be nice to have a kind of a realistic time frame of, what did it take to get this from a sort of the idea stage to your launch in April. And then I've got a couple of other questions that are maybe a little bit more interesting, other than just like, give me a time frame. But
yeah, no, I think that's right. No, I think that's a really important question, because I think, if organizations are looking to invest, I think they have to understand what they're signing up for, right? So, from the time that we started conceptualizing the project and the time that we started testing it, it took about 6 months to get a prototype to test.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more than that. And that was actually streamlined significantly from the original first gen, which took a year. And that was and the reason why it takes so long is because it is a true partnership between myself, my team, and Pete and his team. We are getting under the hood of the decision trees. We are doing interpretation of the data. We are critically analyzing and questioning the connections with program staff. And I think that is one of the reasons why we feel confident going in that it does actually reflect what is actually happening, because you can put a whole bunch of data into a model, into an equation or an algorithm, right? And you get this stuff back and you're like, well, what does this have to do with this? And there are spurious associations between X and Y. And
right.
So we spent a lot of time making meaning of it. And in some cases at the beginning, we reran it. So, what helped with this was that Pete actually helped us to develop a logic model that had the context variables. So what are the things that we wouldn't want to and cannot change about young people who come to us, right? Their foster care history. their race, gender, ethnicity, etc. Right? How many placements they had. We gave, and so that those were the context variables. We put in, we labeled things as risk and protective factors. We labeled things as interventions, and we labeled things as near-term outcomes and long-term outcomes. And we put it all into this logic model, and that helped to provide the framework for it. And then we tested, after we had a prototype, we actually did testing and development with program staff for a year before we launched it statewide and then scaled it to our network affiliate partners.
If my memory serves, I mean, thank you for all those extra details, but I mean, so you're talking about there was a year-long process, then a year long after that, there was a 6-month process, there was a process after that. I mean, so adding all these things together, I mean, you started as an organization working on this project at all back in 2017?
Yeah. I mean, actually, it started in 2014.
Okay, so this is a great reality check, right? Because I think sometimes when we work, especially at least my experience has been working with some of my data science colleagues before they really work with a real world context for the first time. Because the computer science cycle of innovation is like a couple of months, right? And so it's like, you have a new paper with new algorithms and new findings, every couple of months. And the idea that it would take years to actually develop something that can be used is sometimes, I think quite surprising to
it can feel a little daunting, although I will say that there were 2 different versions of the tool, and then we took a break. Because Pete was moving from one organization to another. So there was like a year or 2 break, but this last version of the tool, if I was to say altogether, a year and a half between concept development, piloting and prototyping the tool, testing it with folks, making all different kinds of tweaks, and then scaling it. It was about a year and a half.
No, that's great. And I guess the other piece of this that I wanted to follow up with is the community building participation of especially like your middle managers, as you were talking about, and sort of how did you go about generating their engagement and building trust? Because I think, at least from my experience, that's not, especially when you're talking about people in who are primarily in the field of social work, psychology, child welfare, these are not necessarily people who are eager to embrace data-driven solutions, just because there's not a lot of training in that in their educational backgrounds. So there can be a disconnect. So I mean, what did you do to make that part of it work? Because you referenced it several times, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is, again, like the magnificent kind of human-centered approach that Matt was using with staff, right? People have different relationships with data systems. Some people have a very negative, punitive-based kind of orientation to how data has been utilized against them, et cetera. So putting them in the driver's seat for designing the tool and how they think it needs to be used. So there's other benefits outside of just the modeling, right? Where can I go to get all of this information that I need about my young person that's aligned with their managing and understanding their success? Was really critical. I think also we have a couple of different kind of learning culture mantras, right? At first place, learning is paramount. So all of this is about learning. All of this is about improvement. All of it is about being in service to our young people, and that this tool does not replace your clinical intuition, judgment, and relationship with a young person. It is one of many tools for the toolkit that is going to help you to direct your attention to what you should focus on. And that was a consistent message, because our care managers have so much that they are responsible for. Like, young people come to us with complex experiences and histories, and they may be involved in multiple different systems, right? And are, you know, we're really dedicated and focused on helping them to helping to address all of their needs and then get them to a place where they're self-sufficient. And there's a lot of moving parts and things change on a dime. A young person experiences a crisis and then, you know, priorities shift. Helping give them a way to direct their attention in the midst of the gray was, I think, a huge message that we just conveyed over and over and over again, in concert with getting them to a place where they felt they owned the tool because they designed it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, it's sort of the you know, in social work and psychology, we talk about, you know, community-based participatory research.
Yeah.
You know, but this is really community-based participatory data science is
data science
about. You know, it's really
100%. And we got feedback from young people as well. There were a couple of young people who sat on our innovation committee for the youth roadmap tool to begin with, and we were to help with thinking through the design from a young person's perspective and what they need and what they want, right? So that was really important.
No, that's great. I want to see if there's other folks who would like to ask a question. I'm still seeing people are being shy about throwing questions.
Don't be shy.
Box.
The water's warm. Come on in.
turn it to if either Phoebe or Bistro or Haley, if any of you guys have a question as well. I don't want to monopolize the entire conversation, but I'm happy to. So I'll give folks one more second before I ask my next question. Okay, so kind of continuing down this thread of the, you know, the time it takes to develop it and the way that you get community buy-in. I mean, when you were showing those slides about the interface that the users get to have, there was an enormous amount of data that people had access to, and I'm wondering how folks reacted to what could be potentially an overwhelming amount of information. Like how did, you know, and I guess part of the question is like, how did they react to it? But then the other question is, you know, to what extent were they involved in the actual design of, you know, that interfaces as well, you know? So if you could kind of tell us a little bit more about that, because that's kind of where the end users interface with things, and curious about how that process happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it used to be even more complicated, Eric, believe it or not. It used to be more, there used to be even more. And they were the designers of the user interface. So the managers and staff actually were like, I don't think, like, this is too much, take that out. We want to add this back in. So please put this here. We did a lot of usability testing around the changes that were happening. It is a lot of information, but I think, you know, when you're a practitioner at First Place for Youth and you're implementing, you're kind of, like the model is at that point, like you start using the tool, the model has been to some degree inculcated in you. So a lot of what's in there is not new. It's actually, it's basically our model, and those concepts, the constructs, the intervention practices that are utilized like in this under the services and under the goals, those are things that people understand and know, and they wanted to be able to see. One of the ways that we were able to trim it back was if they've already achieved it, you can hide it. If they, you know, but you can also show it. If you've achieved the service goals or the milestones, you can use that as a way to celebrate wins with young people, et cetera, but you can hide it if it's no longer, if it's already been kind of covered. And then the ongoing needs are the things that you can just keep as a general kind of standard look view of the dashboard.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, the other thing that struck me when you were sharing this was the contrast between this and the work that Phoebe and I are doing right now, which is that, you know, I mean, a lot of it, we have similar goals, right? Like the idea is we're working with LASA and the HMIS data to try to understand, can we make some prescriptions about what sorts of interventions would be the most useful for people and provide that sort of information. So aligned a lot of the goals. one of the things that struck me that you have here is an abundance of data on program engagement, and that was really it sounded like was from, if I remember the stats you're throwing around, that was providing most of the explanation of variance, not actually the characteristics of people as they come to you in the system, which I think is unfortunately a little bit more the way that HUD and the way that they've created these vulnerability tools. They're thinking a lot about collecting data on what's happened to people in the course of your lifetime. And then we're trying to make some predictions about what might be good interventions for people based on those characteristics. And I'm kind of wondering, because you had mentioned also in one of the other, bits of conversation we've had in the last 5 minutes, like that you try to identify what was the context variables versus the process variables. I don't know if that's exactly the words that you use, but so how did you, to what extent in the model are you really relying on the engagement in your program versus who these people are, or a mixture of the two? And how did you come up with the decisions about how to do that, or about why to do that and how to go in that way? Right.
Right. Yeah.
No easy questions for you from me today, Erika, right?
No, these are questions, but they're questions that we have really been challenged to answer in both kind of, rounds of this journey. So, I was really very, adamant about, if we're going to develop a tool, we have to develop a tool that isn't static, that folks can gauge change, right? That change in young people's progress, where they are, where they're going is, if the first version of this tool was a static tool, so it didn't update. The context variables, like the things that don't change, right, but do really distinguish different, what we call participant types of young people, okay, that was used for developing, in predicting the outcome, that was used for the match comparisons, right? So this is a mix of data science and quasi-experimental methods. And so that was primarily used for that, but the risk and protective factors that we address in our program, those were the things that I wanted to make sure were part of the kind of what makes young people more or less likely to engage. So risk and protective factors and context variables were kind of part of this clustering of, here's your participant type group, but within that, what makes you more or less likely to engage in services? And what can we do to not only increase your engagement, but get you on track to enroll in school, to stay employed, right? To get that vocational certificate that you want. So that is how we kind of had to bracket it out, because the things that we can't change, they did serve a purpose, but they shouldn't be showing up in our system, right? They need to be things that are fluid and that we can support young people in. So that's a big part of it. And we had the administrative data is, from our performance management system around what people are doing is absolutely critical, right?
Right. So you have a really well developed, and I know this is one of the things that you did when you first came into First Place for Youth. You've got a really well developed infrastructure around data collection and sort of continuous quality improvement ideas around how to use data within your organization, and so people collect high quality data for you on an ongoing basis. You really, for those of you who think that what Erika has done sounds really easy and you're going to implement it really fast, she's done an enormous amount of work for probably close to 20 years to sort of set the stage for a program like this to be able to come into existence. But it's also an amazing model to see that this can be done. Right. And I think that's why I was so excited about bringing you in to talk with us, is just because I know you've actually got a real live data science.
We're doing it, Eric. We're doing it.
It's amazing, and it's inspiring and somewhat intimidating. I will not lie, because as somebody who's been trying to do this stuff, it's not easy to do, and it's great. But so we've got about 1 minute left. If there's any burning questions or comments from anyone. I'll pause, going once, going twice. Haley, have I missed anyone who's got their hand up?
No.
All right. Well, Thank you all for participating and hanging out and listening to me pick Erika's brain. It was fantastic to hear this presentation. And
thanks for inviting me, Eric.
oh, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you, in the next year or so, as you have more lessons learned from the actual implementation of all.
Yes, yes, and we will be releasing some data reports, technical reports on just kind of what we're learning and what how to do it. So
that's great. The sharing with others in the community of
sector building, field building stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.